My name is Paul C. Taylor. I'm the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies here in the College of the Liberal Arts at Penn State, and it is my great pleasure to introduce this series of short reflections on the lasting legacy of Martin Luther King, Jr. At one point, Martin King was asked about his ambitions for public life, and he said something to this effect: "I aspire to nothing more than excellence in the Christian ministry." I often go back to this line from King because it shows that the public figure that we think we know, the public figures come down to us from narratives and myths about the civil rights movement in the middle of the 20th century. That figure was animated by definite commitments, moral commitments, theological commitments, political commitments. Some of these commitments come, as is obvious, from his Christian belief. Others come from his deep immersion in certain ideas about what American democracy is and can be. So it's important for me, I think, to go back to these definite commitments, because thinking of King in this way makes him a deeper and richer and more challenging figure than the one we sometimes get when we're invited to celebrate his life and career every year during what is often presented to us as a day of service. In that spirit, I've invited a number of our remarkable faculty and staff and students to share with you their own perspectives on the deeper meaning of Martin King's legacy. For me, my Martin King is the figure that Cornel West and others have invited us to think of as the radical king. This is the king who comes into full flower after 1963 or so, the king who was often willing to rail against what he called the triple evils of militarism and racism and materialism. For me, this is the most challenging king, and in part for that reason, I find him the richest and deepest and most interesting version of the figure we're invited to celebrate every year. But as I say, that's my king, and King is a capacious and profound figure whose legacy and historical importance can bear up under different kinds of approaches, different ways of reading him and thinking about him. So if you think about your version of Martin King, the version of that public figure that resonates most closely with you and your commitments, that may look different than the figure that I find most interesting and most challenging. And that's okay. As I say, one of the things that King at his best invited us to do was accept certain kinds of challenges to who we are, who we might be, who we thought we were. So whatever your king looks like, he will almost certainly be, if you connect him to these deeper impulses and commitments and values that animate his public life, he will almost certainly be a deeper figure than the dreamer encased in amber that we're invited sometimes to celebrate every year in January. And if we are to take seriously his call to service, if we are to think seriously about his career as involving a call to service, the work of that service will have to involve the work of thinking hard about reflecting on what we serve and why we serve those things. Thank you.